Pat Flynn here, Philosophy for the People. Brief video. I want to show you how to make a book your own, how to mark up a book, how to take proper notes. This video will complement my previous video on how to read philosophy. In that video, if you recall, I mentioned how important it was that whenever you approach a philosophical text, you do so with pen or pencil in hand, ready to underline, highlight, draw hearts and stars, maybe a unicorn here or there, and to take notes in the margins or at the top or the bottom of the pages, to write down questions. This is how to be a more active and engaged reader, and this is how to ensure that you catch as much of the message as possible that the author is trying to send your way. Now, of course, it is impossible to be a completely passive reader in the act of reading. There's always some level of activity, unless you've completely fallen asleep, and at that point, you're no longer reading. You're sleeping. But you can be a more or less active and engaged reader. And our goal, if we're trying to go from a state of understanding less to understanding more, is to be as active as possible when we are reading. And the best way to do that is to have pencil in hand and to have some sort of system for marking up a book, for making a book your own. So I want to briefly share my system. And a lot of this is inspired by Mortimer Adler and what he talks about in the book I recommended last time, How to Read a Book, with a few quirks of my own, just stuff that I found works well for me over the years, over many years of effectively destroying books. But let me say, real quickly, don't be afraid to mark up a book. Books are meant to be wrestled with. They're meant to be loved. I think of my books like I think of my guitars. I beat the hell out of my guitars. These things are made for rock and roll. You're meant to wail on them. Same with books, right? You're meant to wrestle with these things intellectually, and I think literally sometimes physically, right? I could probably make a funny little clip that I splice in here actually wrestling with my book, but I'll just let your imagination run with that. So don't be shy about that. These aren't fashion statements. You purchase books, hopefully you're doing this with books you've purchased. Don't do this with a library book. It'll get me in trouble. But hopefully you purchase books because you really want to get something out of them. Intellectually, you want to go from understanding less to understanding more. You want to do those mental pull-ups. So if that's the case, don't just have them looking pretty on your shelf. Have these books, have them around, engage with them, be an active reader. So if you open any of my books, you'll really notice several common features of my system of note-taking. I'll explain them briefly, and I'll splice in some clips so you can have a closer look at what's going on. By the way, I have this book here. It's called Taking God Seriously. This is a debate book between Brian Davis and Michael Ruse. Don't worry about this book or the content of this book. It was here, it was convenient, and it'll just be useful to show you my system of taking notes. So really, there's like 4 or 5 things that I want to emphasize. Very simple, very basic, but again, when you do the basics well, it makes all the difference, whether it comes to engaging with a philosophical text or practicing music or exercising in the gym. It's all about doing the basics well. They often say mastery isn't about moving totally away from the basics, but deeper into them. I think there's some truth to that, definitely. Okay, so here's what I do. I underline important or forceful statements. I bracket or highlight even more important statements or paragraphs or sections. I star the most important points, usually 5 to 10, of a book. So whatever I consider, the most important points of any philosophical text, a book or a treatise or an essay, I'll do a little star. If you want, you could do a heart or a unicorn. So I have markings in order of importance. Anything that strikes me as generally important or forceful, I'll underline it. So lots of underlining going on. But if something is a bit more important, say a central argument or some critical support for the central argument, then I'll bracket it or draw a vertical line. And if some point is hugely important, then it gets a nice little star. That section gets a nice little star for me. Again, you can use whatever notation that you want, but maybe you like hearts or something like that. Doesn't matter to me. And then The other thing I'll do is I will fold the corner of a page for any section that is especially relevant or useful for my own purposes. Often what I'm reading relates to some larger project that I'm working on. So, for example, this book, I have the corner folded, and I went right to the folded corner, and it brought me to the section on the problem of evil. This makes sense. I do a lot of work in philosophy of religion, and the problem of evil is something that is obviously hotly debated. So it's not surprising that if I pick up this book and I go to the folded corner, that I'm brought to the section on the problem of evil. That makes sense, given my purposes. And that indeed is why I fold the corner, because if I put the book away for a while and I return to it, I want to quickly be able to return to whatever I thought was most important and relevant for me. And that's That's exactly what this allows me to do. I can pick up a book. I might hardly remember what's in it. It might have been a very long time since I've engaged with the book. And this quickly helps me zoom to, what at least at a certain time I thought was most relevant for me. Okay. And then, of course, I take notes. I take notes and I ask questions. Asking questions as you read is so important for being an active and engaged reader. You don't want your questions to just blip into non-existence, which they will if you don't write them down. If you have a question as you're reading, you need to write it down. You might find that it's answered, on the very next page, or maybe not. It's something that you might have to come back to and try and answer for yourself as you dive deeper into the text. I cannot emphasize the importance of asking questions, okay? But also you want to take notes. You want to try and summarize key points. If you can, when possible, you should actually take different, this is going to be a little bit of a diversion, but at this point it's probably inevitable. Let me explain the different types of note making. So, because I think you should engage in all three. So the first type of note taking is simply structural. And structural note taking is very simple, superficial note taking. It's the sort of note taking that occurs when you're just trying to get an idea of what the book is about on the whole. So you look at the front cover, you read the back cover, and you go to the table of contents. And indeed, if I go to the table of contents here, there are structural notes. Excuse me for the folding noises. And again, these are very simple. When it comes to structural note-taking, you're really just trying to answer some very basic, broad questions. What kind of book is this? What is the book about on the whole? And what is its ordering? What is its general structure? And I'm not going to hold this any closer because you probably won't be able to read my awful handwriting anyways, but I'll read it for you. Simple structural note-taking. I write, this is a debate/dialogue book arguing for and against the existence of God. The book begins with reflections on the relation of faith and reason, the compatibility or incompatibility thereof, then proceeds to examine philosophical arguments for and against the existence of God. The book later considers questions about the nature of morality and its dependence or independence on God and divine revelation. So very simple. I'm just taking some broad structural notes. That's important, and it's important to do that first. This relates to what I said in the previous video about how to read philosophy, that the first thing you want to do is just kind of take an inspectional look of the thing that you're about to engage with, whether it's a book or an essay. If possible, read the front and back cover, look at the table of contents, and then give the thing a very quick read where you maintain as much momentum as possible and you don't slow down, you don't worry about understanding everything. You're just trying to, get a general lay of the land before you go back and engage a more substantive read. Okay, so that's the first level of note-taking. The second level of note-taking is conceptual, and this is most of the note-taking you'll probably do for any one text, and this is where now you're taking notes on the actual ideas and arguments and concepts presented by the author of the text, okay? The third level of note-taking is a bit more broad and systematic, and I have a note of that sort here, and this would be dialectical note-taking. And dialectical note-taking occurs when you're trying to consider the wider conversation. And this will happen when you're reading multiple books and hearing from many different perspectives on a single subject. So you might take a note in this book about how a particular idea or contribution bears on the wider conversation either for or against considerations offered by other authors that you've read. So that would be dialectical note taking. And sometimes you'll want to put that right in a particular book, or you might want to keep a separate notebook for these dialectical notes. And it's concerning to the conversation as a whole, as it is engaged by many different thinkers, and you're reading different books and different authors, many of whom will have different perspectives on a particular issue. So again, the three types of note-taking: structural, inspectional note-taking, conceptual about the more substantive note-taking on this particular text, and then dialectical note-taking, which considers, the wider philosophical conversation as other people are bearing in on it. You want to take notes, all those kinds of notes, structural, conceptual, and dialectical. If you go through, here, for example, there's some conceptual notes for me on this page, and then I look to the next page and I can see that there's a dialectical note concerning necessary linking principles to run the problem of evil, and how I don't think that the note is pointing out how even if I think these linking principles apply on the same level of reality, at least that is, let me rephrase that. I think these linking principles apply to entities relating to each other on the same level of reality, but not to entities that bear a relation of deep metaphysical dependence on one another. Don't worry about the context of that. It's really not important. But for me, that is a note where I'm taking a point that Davis is making here and bringing it into a wider philosophical context that I'm aware of concerning notions of metaphysical dependence and grounding relations and stuff like that. Again, not important for this conversation. It's just an example where the note that I have put down here isn't just about this particular book. It's about the wider philosophical conversation. Okay, so that's note-taking. I think we've covered just about everything I've wanted to cover so far. Let me briefly summarize what I've said, and then if I forgot anything, maybe I'll remember it. If not, we'll say goodbye. Underline important stuff. Bracket or highlight more important stuff. Star the most important stuff, and fold the corner of a page or pages that are most relevant for you and your writing, research purposes, or whatever. Take notes, structural notes, conceptual notes, dialectical notes, right in the margins or at the top and bottom of the pages. I'm writing all over. And ask questions as you go along. And of course, as you come back through a philosophical text, if you encounter a question that you've written down, well, you should try to answer it, right? The first time through, when you're reading something substantively, you might put down a question. But the second time through, you should really stop at that question and say, do I have an answer to this yet? If not, let me really focus on trying to get this question answered now that I'm reading through the text again. And as I said in my previous video, it is so important that you don't just read a philosophical book once. You do your quick inspectional read, then you do your substantive read, and then you do many more substantive reads after that. My dear friends, when it comes to being an active reader, when it comes to reading philosophy, this is not about speed reading. Speed reading is fine if you're reading the newspaper and you're just trying to acquire information. When you engage with a philosophical text, this is best done slow. You're really trying to wrestle with ideas. You're performing those mental pull-ups. You should be rereading difficult passages. You should be asking these questions. You should be trying to wrestle with the text intellectually, seeing if you can answer these questions as you go, cross-referencing. It's not something that you should be trying to rush or speed through. So don't worry about, sometimes people brag about how many books they read in a week. This is ridiculous. If you're doing this well, your reading might be very, very slow, and that's okay, because if you're really trying to be as active and engaged as possible, that reading will be far more profitable, since it's not just about acquiring information, but gaining understanding. And that's all I have for you today. My name is Pat Flynn. This is Philosophy for the People. Don't forget to leave a comment. What is your system of making a book your own? How do you mark up a book? Do you have any suggestions or tools that I have failed to articulate here? This is all I got. It's very simple. It's very basic, but it works well for me. Certainly, this isn't the only way. I'm sure lots of people, hopefully even you, will have a few tips and strategies of your own. I'd love to hear them. Please provide those resources below. If you like this video, do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you like what you see here. As always, philosophy is the mind's gym, and we're here to ensure that you never skip thought day. Goodbye.